In this video we're going to discuss HTML alignment. Okay, so I've pulled up a text editor. I'm on my desktop. I'm going to create a new file, alignment.html. Okay, and I'll create the basic HTML tags, specify the doc type, the HTML tag, the head tag, the body tag, title tag, and we'll call this alignment. Really, this is simple alignment. There are much more complicated ways to align things. They're actually better. Alright, and we've got a style section. Okay, and then in here we're going to have a div, that's going to be the main div. We're going to call this our app. Okay, and then inside of this div we're going to make an h1 tag that says simple alignment, and we'll give this an ID attribute. This ID attribute is going to be page heading 1, so ph1. Alright, and let's go ahead and in our style section add a few CSS rules. So for the app div, this is a CSS selector. The dot means select any HTML elements that have the class named app. Okay, so we have down here this div has a class, and the value of class attribute is app. Okay, so this CSS rule will apply to that element. So I'm going to make the background color of our app blue. Before we go too much further, I'm just going to open it up in a browser and see what we have. Okay, so if we look at this, we can right click and inspect, and here we see the app div, right? We highlight that. That's actually showing the blue, and the H1 is in front of that, but the H1 does not have a background, so we see the blue through the back of the H1 element. So if we go back and change the color of the H1 element, so this is the ID is ph1, so I can use the CSS selector hash, which means ID, and I can look for the HTML element with ID ph1. And then I can say background color red. Okay, so now we see the whole thing turned red, it appears, but really the background is the app div is blue, and the H1 tag actually just fills in the exact same space, and it's over the top. So when we make that red, we can no longer see any of the blue. Okay, so now we want to align these things. The simplest form of alignment is the text align property, which allows you, as the name suggests, to align text. And we're going to text align, that typo there, text align center. Alright, now notice this is in the page heading 1, right? So this is the parent of this content. So you use text align on a parent element, and it will align the child content. Right? So open that up, and we notice that now this is aligned to the center, and you can kind of see it better if we don't have the developer tools open. Okay, so that's nice. We can align that. Okay, so let's make another H1 tag, and we'll call this one ID page heading 2, and this is container alignment. Okay, so you notice when we did the text align center, this page heading 1 element has the background color red. So that actual background color we see still stretches across the entire screen, right? We didn't change the size of the container, we just centered the content within the container. Okay, so with divs, these are display block elements. Okay, so there's a few different types of display properties an HTML element can have. A div is display block, which means any content beside it is forced above or below that div. Okay, and H1s are display block as well. All right, so we have CSS selector, page heading 2. This is going to select this HTML element because it has an ID property, hash, and then ph2. And what we're going to do here is we're going to set a width to 50%. Okay, and if we do that, we can use margin left auto and margin right auto to center the container itself. All right. So if we save this and reload, okay, we see, and if I stretch it out a little bit, we see that we have, oh, I need to add the color, the background color, to help make this a little bit more clear. Background color green. Okay, so we noticed initially before I added that background color that this text is not centered within the div, right? It looks sort of centered, but not quite. Well, when we added the background colors, we can kind of see a little bit better what's actually happening. All right, so we have our background, our app div is blue, and this page heading 2 is green. And what we've done is we've made the width of this H1 50% of the width of the parent. Okay, so we see this is equivalent to this blue on either side. Right, so it's 50% of the entire width. Okay, but we did not do a text align center, so the text is not centered. Right, but with a display block element, you can center the element itself using margin left auto and margin right auto. Okay, so remember this is with display block. Okay, and this is the default, so we didn't really need to specify there, but that's just for clarity's sake. All right, refresh the page and we see nothing changes. So if we do one more div here, we do ph3. And instead of container alignment, we'll call ph2 block alignment because it's display block, and ph3 we're going to call this inline block alignment. Okay, so what I can do here is use my CSS selector ph3. Again, the hash is, I'm selecting an HTML element with the ID property, that's what the hash looks for, and then ph3, and that's the value of that ID attribute. Okay, so this CSS rule will apply to that element, and we're going to have background color purple, color white, just so we can see a little bit better. All right, and we're going to say, well, first let's see what we have here. There we go. And then we want a display of inline block. Okay, so inline block, what that basically does is instead of the div stretching the entire width of the page and forcing any elements beside it to be above or below it, the div automatically tries to be as small as possible, and it will try to enclose the content that it has. Okay, so we'll see this purple shrink all the way down. Okay, and then also other inline or inline block elements can be on either side of it. Okay, that's basically what inline block does. Oops, that's the wrong button. So refresh, and we see that the div itself collapsed down to try to be as small as possible. So it's only as large as it's forced to be by the content inside of it. All right. Now with an inline block element, I can center that with text align using the parent. Okay, so if the parent element has app, if this has text align center, then I can center any inline style element. There's display inline, which is what text is by default, and inline block is a div. It's a container, but it behaves like an inline element. All right, so inline elements can be horizontally aligned by text align center on the parent. Okay, and we see that this got centered. We also saw this refresh and get centered. That's because the text align property is inherited down. Okay, so if we change this back to, we remove that. Right, the text align starts off to the left, and we can look at the text align property. So this is on W3 Schools, and whenever you're using a new CSS property, it's good to go to some sort of documentation reference and learn a little bit about it. Some of the details that might not be obvious. So text align property, one thing that's interesting is the default value is left if you have a language that is left to right, and it's right if the language is right to left. Okay, so that's one of the unique features of designating the type of language you have on your HTML page. Okay, so these are the possible values: left, right, center, justify, initial, and inherit. And that inherit is what caused, that's what basically when we made on the app div text align center, that's what made the H1 here go ahead and inherit that trait, and so it centered its text as well. Alright. Okay, so that is the text align property. We also used margin. Margin auto is kind of a special case of margin. We talked a little bit about the box model, and if we go to back to our page and we look at the developer tools, down here in the corner we have basically a picture of what's known as the box model. Okay, in the center here we have the content of a particular element. So let me select yes, this center H1. In the center we have the actual content. On the outside we have padding. In this case we don't have any padding on this one, but I can change that. I can add padding 5px, so 5 pixels of padding everywhere. Right, now when I hover over padding, we see the padding itself is highlighted, and notice the background shows through all the way through the padding. So any padding you specify, the background color will show behind that padding. Right? Then we have a border, which we don't have, but we can add one. Right? So if I add border, I can say I want a solid border, 5 pixels wide, and black. All right. And so here again we got content in the middle, then we see the padding is highlighted, and then the border is highlighted, and then we have margin. Okay, and in this case we had margin left and margin right set to auto, but there's also a top and bottom margin. Okay, so that is the box model, and as you look at these properties, it's important to notice the order. You have content, then padding, and the background shows through the padding. Border, the background also shows through the border. We can see that if we use a different type of border, dotted for example. Okay, we still see behind the border we see the color of the div, the background color, right? So padding and border both allow the background color of the element to shine through, whereas margin, the background color, does not affect the area of the particular element specified by the margin, right? So we see no background color here, right? So that's the vertical alignment, or I'm sorry, horizontal alignment. Now we need to discuss concept of vertical alignment. So we can go back to our page and create another little div inside here. And I'm going to call this one vert parent. Alright, so I'm going to specify vertical alignment in here. Alright, what we want to do is we're going to have a couple of divs, and we're going to make these inline block elements. And so this is going to be vert child 1, and then vert child 2. Okay, and then we'll just put some text in the middle. Vertical. All right. So we've created 3 specific elements, and then the content here is sort of a text node. It's not wrapped around an HTML. It's not wrapped around. Doesn't have HTML wrapped around it, but it is considered a text node. Okay. So we've got 4 sort of elements here, and we need to specify CSS for at least these 3 that we specified classes for. So we've got dot vert parent. Remember, the dot means class selector. And then we have dot vert child 1 and dot vert child 2. Okay, so the first thing we might want to do is make some background colors so we can tell what's going on. Okay, and in order for us to see anything in the children, we might need to specify a width, and we'll say this is going to be 100 pixels. We'll say 70, and then this one will be 100. Why not? All right. So we've added the vertical alignment parent, vertical child, and text, and then another vertical child. Okay. So we refresh our page, and all we really see at this point is the one div right here. If we right-click and inspect, we look at vertical parent, and the background color is red. Right, and we look at the children here, class vertical child 1. Right, it's got a width of 70 pixels, but it has no content, so nothing's showing up. So if I want to actually have this item show up, I need to change the display to inline block. All right, so for both of these children, display inline block. Okay, so now we can inspect the elements, and we have vertical parent, vertical child, inline block, background color blue, background color orange. Alright, so we see that it's not displaying the actual text there. So let's just add a child element and see if we can get it to display. See what's going on here. We right click and there. So without any content in the div itself is not it's not shown. And we'll change that one from blue so we have a better view. Make this one green. All right. So there, I've got a div and we've got some content. When I remove that content, the div collapses down into essentially nothing. Okay. So we can probably just add white space as our content. Nope, it doesn't like that either.